A piece of wire that costs less than a stick of gum just outfished an $80 fish finder. And the proof has been hiding in plain sight for over half a century. Last summer, East Texas, a blistering hot dock. An old man with a cracked cane pole and a rusty tackle box held together by duct tape and faith. No sonar, no fish finder, no glowing screen. Just a small, tarnished spool of copper wire tucked in his shirt pocket. And a secret the fishing electronics industry has been praying you never figure out. By sundown, that old man had pulled 19 massive catfish from that lake. 3 guys in a $60,000 bass boat staring at screens that cost more than my first car? 2 fish. His name was Walter Sims. He learned this trick in 1958 from an electrician named James who fished the Sabine River every weekend. One afternoon, James leaned over and said 6 words that changed everything. "Wrap copper wire around your hook." Walter thought he was crazy, until he tried it the next morning and the water came alive. What Walter discovered on that riverbank, and what modern marine biology has quietly confirmed since, shatters everything you've been told about finding fish. The greatest fish-finding technology on Earth doesn't need a charger, never needs a software update, and costs 11 cents at your local hardware store. Welcome back to Forbidden Lures. I'm your host, and this is where we dig up the banned baits, the lost hacks, and the buried science the fishing industry wants kept in the dark. Today, we're exposing an $8 billion business model, and it all starts with a man, a river, and a secret nobody was supposed to hear. Part 1. The Sabine River Secret of 1958. The year was 1958. Dwight Eisenhower was in the White House. Rock and roll was barely out of diapers. And on the muddy banks of the Sabine River in East Texas, an electrician named James was about to accidentally stumble onto something the entire fishing industry would spend the next 6 decades trying to bury. James didn't have a marine biology degree. He didn't have a laboratory. What he had was 30 years of wiring houses, calloused hands, and the quiet, razor-sharp observation skills of a man who watched water the way a hawk watches a field. And James noticed something bizarre, something that didn't make any sense at first. Whenever he dropped scrap bits of bare copper wire near his baited hooks, the fish came faster. They hit harder. They came in aggressive, like they were being pulled by a force he couldn't see, like an invisible magnet was dragging them to his line. Now here's what separates a man like James from the rest of us. He didn't run home and tell his buddies. He didn't brag at the bait shop. Being a man of science in his own right, James kept his mouth shut. For 2 full years, 730 days of silence. He spent every weekend on that river, methodically testing his copper wire theory against every bait, every lure, and every commercial fish scent on the market. And the copper won, every single time. That is how you know a secret is real, brother. When a man risks absolutely nothing by keeping his mouth shut, but eventually chooses to share it anyway, only after he's proven it to himself hundreds of times over. So, why should you care about a 67-year-old secret from a Texas electrician? Because the answer to that question is worth $8 billion. Bass Pro Shops generated over $8 billion in revenue last year. Garmin sells fish finders starting at $300 and climbing well into the thousands. Humminbird and Lowrance spend millions on marketing every single year to convince you, to condition you into believing you cannot successfully find a fish without a glowing LED screen bolted to your bow. They sell you $80 electronic fish attractors with batteries that die in 8 hours. New models roll out every 2 years. Firmware updates, subscription services, planned obsolescence dressed up in camo and waterproof packaging. Now, imagine what happens if every angler in America suddenly realizes that an 11-cent piece of wire does the exact same job. No batteries, works 24 hours a day, no subscription, no expiration date. Their entire electronics department doesn't just take a hit, it collapses. This isn't a crazy conspiracy theory, my friends. It is a calculated $8 billion business decision. They chose to sell you electricity in a box, but nature has been generating it underwater for free since before humans ever picked up a fishing rod. But hold on, I can almost hear you through the screen right now. Copper wire? Come on, man, that's just an old wives' tale. Well, buckle up, because what the scientists found when they finally put this under a microscope didn't just explain why it works. It proved why the industry has been terrified of you knowing about it. Part 2. The science of the dinner bell. The galvanic couple. This is where it gets real. This is where we stop talking folklore and start talking physics. And I promise you, the biology behind this is going to hit you like a freight train. When bare copper touches steel inside water, something happens. Something the tackle companies pray you never Google. The two metals form what physicists and chemists call a galvanic couple. If you pull up the galvanic series chart, you'll see that copper sits much higher on that scale than the steel or zinc in your fishing hook. The moment you introduce water, which acts as a natural electrolyte, a voltage difference is created between those two metals. That difference generates a continuous, uninterrupted microcurrent of exactly 0.3 volts. That is 300,000 microvolts radiating directly from your hook. Non-stop, in every direction, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as long as that copper is touching that steel and both are in the water. Now let that number sit in your mind for a moment. 300,000 microvolts. And ask yourself, why does that matter to a fish? Here's why. Every single fish swimming in the water column has a lateral line running down its body, packed with thousands of electroreceptor cells. These cells are designed by millions of years of evolution to detect electrical disturbances in the water. But some species aren't just sensitive. They are biological supercomputers. A landmark study from Texas A&M University in 2008 proved what river fishermen had known for decades. Take the catfish. A single catfish barbel, those little whiskers on their face, contains over 20,000 highly specialized electroreceptor cells. 20,000 receptors on one whisker, and a catfish has 8 of them. These cells are so impossibly sensitive that they can detect electrical variations in the water as tiny as 1 single microvolt. 1. So when your hook is throwing out 300,000 microvolts of continuous galvanic electricity, you are not just getting their attention. You are ringing a dinner bell so loud that every catfish within range has no biological choice but to come find it. Walter Sims used to say it perfectly. The catfish come running like dogs to a whistle that humans can't hear. And the data backs him up. That signal travels outward, exceeding distances of 40 feet through the water column. 40 feet of invisible, irresistible pull. No plastic lure does this. No spray-on attractant does this. No battery-powered device on the market can match the raw, biological pull of this natural frequency. It speaks directly to the fish's central nervous system. It triggers their deepest predatory hunting instinct. They don't just want to investigate it. Their DNA forces them to. Now, if you're thinking this is just some backwoods Texas folklore that never made it past the state line, I need to take you somewhere. Across the Atlantic Ocean to a quiet English river, where one of the greatest fly fishermen who ever lived stumbled onto the exact same secret. Part 3. The Global Evidence. Frank Sawyer and the Killer Bug. If this copper wire hack were just a local Texas legend, you could dismiss it. You could call it a tall tale. But what I'm about to show you proves that this phenomenon isn't regional. It's universal. And the fishing establishment on both sides of the Atlantic has been sitting on it. Let me introduce you to a man named Frank Sawyer. From the 1930s to the 1950s, Frank Sawyer was the riverkeeper of the River Avon in England. His job was to manage one of the most prestigious trout streams in the world. And in doing so, he invented some of the most legendary flies in the history of fly fishing, including the pheasant tail nymph and a pattern so devastatingly effective it was literally named the killer bug. Now, here's the part nobody talks about. Frank Sawyer's great secret ingredient? He didn't use tying thread. He used bare, reddish-brown copper wire salvaged from old electric motors to build the bodies of his flies. Copper wire, wrapped directly around high-carbon steel hooks. For decades, fly fishermen across Europe debated endlessly about why Sawyer's simple, almost ugly little flies caught 10 times more trout and grayling than the beautifully crafted, expensive silk patterns everyone else was tying. Experts analyzed the specific shade of Chadwick's 477 wool he used. They studied his casting technique. They wrote entire books about his presentation. But the truth was never in the wool. It was hiding underneath it. Bare copper wire, kissing high-carbon steel submerged in moving water. And here is the proof that seals the deal. A famous angler named Oliver Kite noticed something remarkable. Even after fish had completely chewed all the wool off Sawyer's flies, leaving nothing but a bare hook wrapped in copper wire, trout and grayling would still attack it aggressively. They called it the bare hook nymph. A hook with no bait, no feathers, no color, nothing but copper and steel. And fish couldn't leave it alone. Why? Because the copper-steel galvanic reaction was emitting a subtle electrical field that perfectly mimicked the bioelectric signature of a living, breathing aquatic insect. The fish weren't eating a fly. They were chasing an electrical ghost. From the muddy rivers of East Texas to the pristine chalk streams of southern England. Two continents, two completely different fishing traditions. Same physics, same results. Same secret the industry forgot to mention. And by the way, you want to know the real kicker? The commercial fishing industry already uses this technology. They know it works. Commercial salmon trawlers on the Pacific coast use expensive units called black boxes that pump a 0.65-volt positive charge into their downrigger cables to draw massive schools of salmon to their boats. It's standard equipment on professional commercial vessels. The industry knows electrical attraction is real. They packaged it into a $500 box for the pros, and they kept you, the recreational angler, completely and totally in the dark. But not anymore. Because right now, I'm going to show you exactly how to build this yourself. And pay close attention, because if you mess up one specific detail, you kill the entire signal. Part 4. Walter's Exact Blueprint. How to rig the hack. All right, you've heard the history. You understand the science. Now we get to the part that matters most. The blueprint. How you take a plain, ordinary steel hook and turn it into a biological homing beacon that fish cannot ignore. This is Walter Sims' method, refined over 50 years and hundreds of fishing trips. Listen closely, because there is one critical detail that most people get wrong, and it destroys everything. Step 1. The wire. This is where 90% of people fail before they even start. You cannot use just any wire. Go to your local hardware store and look for solid copper electrical wire. You want 18-gauge or 20-gauge bare, uncoated copper wire. And I cannot stress this enough. Do not, under any circumstances, use insulated wire. Do not use craft wire with an enamel coating. Do not use painted wire. The plastic or enamel coating acts as a shield and completely blocks the electrical current from reaching the water. It must be raw, bare, solid copper. Nothing between the metal and the water. A 3-foot piece costs about 11 cents and gives you enough material to rig over 30 hooks. Step 2. The wrap. Cut a piece of copper wire about 2 inches long. Hold one end against the shank of your steel hook, right below the eye. Begin wrapping the wire tightly around the shank with steady, even pressure. Now, this next part comes directly from Walter's 50 years of testing, and it is not negotiable. You must make exactly 5 complete wraps, no gaps between each turn. 5. Why 5? Because Walter tested this obsessively on hundreds of trips over half a century. Fewer than 5 wraps, and there isn't enough surface area contact between the copper and the steel to produce a strong enough galvanic signal. The current is too weak. The fish can't detect it beyond a few feet. More than 7 wraps, and you add too much weight, completely destroying the natural balance and presentation of your hook. Your bait looks wrong. Your drift is off. 5 wraps creates the absolute sweet spot. Maximum galvanic output with 0 sacrifice to presentation. Step 3. The lockdown. After your 5th wrap, fold the tail end of the wire over the last turn and crimp it tight with a pair of pliers. Firm, secure, done. And now, brother, the most important rule of all. The rule that Walter drilled into my head until I could repeat it in my sleep. Never, ever, under any circumstances, use glue. Do not use superglue. Do not use solder. Do not use tape. Do not use clear coat, nail polish, or anything else to secure that copper wire to the hook. The bare metal-to-metal contact between the copper and the steel, exposed directly to the water, is the engine. It is the battery. The moment you cover that contact point with any foreign substance, you insulate it. The circuit breaks. The electrical signal dies instantly. And you are left with nothing but a heavy, useless, silent hook sitting on the bottom. 11 cents. 5 wraps. Bare metal to bare metal. That is the entire formula. But knowing the formula is only half the battle, because this hack doesn't work equally on every species. And what I'm about to tell you next is the difference between catching a few fish and absolutely loading the boat. Part 5. The hit list. Species that go crazy for copper. Now that your hook is weaponized, the question becomes, what are we hunting? Because I'll be straight with you, this copper wire hack does not work the same on every fish. And honesty is what separates this channel from a guy in a logo polo shirt trying to sell you something behind a retail counter. Let's start with the undisputed heavyweight champions of electrical detection. Channel Catfish. Walter used to tell me about summer evenings on the Sabine when he could feel the rod bending before he even finished setting it down. He'd drop a copper-wrapped hook tipped with cut bait or chicken liver into a deep hole, and before he could crack open a cold drink, the line would be screaming. As we discussed, their barbels are covered in the most advanced electroreceptor array in North American freshwaters. The 0.3-volt microcurrent radiates through the water, acting as a long-range beacon, pulling channel cats in from 40 feet away. Once they close the distance, the scent of the bait seals the deal. Walter caught more channel cats with this method than any other, by a margin that wasn't even close. Next, blue catfish. Blues respond even stronger than channels, especially when you're fishing in deep, moving water. Here's why. In a river current, the galvanic signal disperses downstream like a scent trail, except it's electrical. It creates a literal, invisible highway in the water column. Blue cats lock onto that signal and track it upstream, directly to your hook, like a bloodhound following a trail of blood. Walter's biggest catches on the Sabine were 15-pound-plus blue cats that had tracked his copper signal from distances that made his jaw drop. Now let's talk finesse. Crappie and bluegill. Crappie respond beautifully to copper, especially in calm, flat lake water where there's no current to scatter the signal. Their lateral lines are incredibly sensitive to tiny fluctuations in the electrical field. However, crappie are delicate, finicky biters. A heavy 18-gauge wire will spook them faster than a slamming screen door. For crappie, you need to downsize. Use a thinner 20-gauge wire and drop to only 4 wraps. Tip it with a live minnow. The electrical field draws them in from a distance, and the minnow triggers the commitment. For bluegill in the warm shallows, 5 wraps of 20-gauge wire tipped with a piece of nightcrawler is absolute dynamite. The electric field reaches into the weed beds and pulls them out into the open, and the worm triggers the strike. It's like calling them by name. Now, I need to tell you something. And this is the part where every other fishing channel would lie to you. There is one hugely popular species where this copper wire hack does not shine. Largemouth bass. Largemouth bass are almost entirely visual ambush predators. They hunt based on erratic movement, flash, vibration, and profile. The subtle, steady electrical hum from a galvanic couple does not fire their predatory strike mechanism the way it does for catfish and panfish. If you are going out specifically targeting trophy largemouth, this is not your primary weapon. I tell you this because on Forbidden Lures, we deal in reality, not fairy tales, not hype. If something doesn't work, you deserve to know before you waste your time. And the fact that I'm telling you where this hack falls short should tell you everything about how much I believe in where it dominates. But we are not done yet. Because even with the right species and the right rig, there is a window of time and a maintenance secret that separates the guys who catch 5 fish from the guys who catch 50. Part 6. The electric hours and crucial maintenance. Walter Sims fished this copper rig for 50 years, and in those 50 years, he noticed a pattern that nobody else was paying attention to. He called it the electric hours, and once you understand this, you will never look at your fishing schedule the same way again. Here's the science. Water temperature directly controls how efficiently electricity travels. Cold water is dense and sluggish. It conducts electricity far less effectively than warm water. So in the early morning, when the water is at its coolest, your galvanic signal won't reach the full 40-foot range. It still works, don't get me wrong. Fish senses actually heighten in cold water to compensate for reduced visibility. So you'll still pick up fish at closer ranges, but you're not operating at full power. The golden window, the absolute sweet spot, is from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. This is when the sun beats down, surface temperatures peak, and the electrical conductivity of the water reaches its absolute maximum. During these hours, that 300,000 microvolt signal screams through the water column like a siren. Walter fished the electric hours every single chance he got, targeting the warmest sections of the lake or river where his copper rig could broadcast at full strength. Everyone else was fishing dawn and dusk because that's what the magazines told them. Walter was catching fish in the middle of the day because he understood the physics. Now, the second secret. And this is the biggest mistake that people make after they learn this hack. They rig it right, they fish the right species, they fish the right hours. And then, after 5 or 6 trips, it mysteriously stops working, and they think the secret was a lie. It's not a lie, it's oxidation. Copper oxidizes. When bare copper sits in water over time, it develops a dull greenish layer called verdigris. You've seen it on old pennies, on the Statue of Liberty. That green coating is essentially an insulator. It's a wall between your copper and the water. After about 5 or 6 fishing trips, that verdigris slowly smothers the copper surface, blocks it from making proper contact with the water, and your 300,000 microvolt signal chokes out and dies. The fix takes 5 seconds. Before every trip, take your pocket knife and lightly scrape the copper wire on your hook. Just scratch off the green layer to expose the bright, shiny, fresh copper underneath. That's it. The battery is instantly recharged, full power. Or, since we're talking about 11 cents per hook, just cut the old wire off and wrap a fresh piece. It is infinitely cheaper than replacing a corroded transducer or buying another pack of premium soft plastics that cost more than your lunch. 5 seconds of maintenance. That's the difference between a dead rig and a fish magnet. And now you know everything Walter knew. Reclaiming our roots. So let's step back and look at what we've uncovered today. For 11 cents, you can turn any ordinary hook into an active biological homing beacon that fish detect from 40 feet away through their lateral lines. No batteries to die on you at 2 in the afternoon. No chargers to forget at home. No subscriptions. No planned obsolescence. No firmware update that somehow makes your old unit stop working right when the new model comes out. An electrician on the Sabine River figured this out by watching the water in 1958. Walter Sims used it to dominate lakes for 50 years, pulling 19 fish in a single afternoon, while the guys with the fat wallets and the fancy screens sat there catching nothing. Frank Sawyer used the exact same physics on the other side of the planet to become one of the greatest fly fishermen Europe has ever seen. Meanwhile, the giant corporations of the tackle industry have spent 6 decades selling you the alternative. $8 billion a year. Screens, transducers, batteries, software. All to do what a tiny strip of copper and steel already does, completely, for free. The greatest fishing knowledge on Earth doesn't live in a corporate marketing boardroom. It never did. It lives with the old-timers, the men who sat on cracked wooden docks, watched the water until their eyes burned, and understood something about fish that no algorithm ever will. Here's what I want you to do. This weekend, just 1 hook, 5 wraps, your cheapest bait. Fish it side by side with your regular rig for 2 hours. That's all I'm asking. 2 hours and 11 cents. Then come back here and tell me what happened in the comments. I already know what you're going to say. Now, we've covered the foundation today, but the rabbit hole of galvanic fishing goes much, much deeper than this. The old-timers had species-specific conductivity charts, dual metal stacking techniques, seasonal timing guides based on water mineral content. Walter had notebooks full of data that would make a marine biologist's head spin. But that, brother, is a story for the next video. If this changed the way you think about what you actually need to catch fish, hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because what we're going to cover in part 2 makes today's video look like a warm-up. And most importantly, share this video with a fishing buddy, especially the one who just dropped $800 on a new fish finder and still can't catch a cold in a rainstorm. Let him know that sometimes 11 cents of copper outfishes the entire store. Stay smart, stay dangerous, and keep throwing those forbidden lures. I'll see you on the water.